Thomas Jackson is an environmental artist and photographer known for his abstract photographs that combine landscapes, sculpture, and kinetic art. Last spring, he came to Serenbe and installed and photographed incredible pieces in Serenbe in the Woods during an artist residency with the Art Farm. This was in partnership with our friends at Jackson Fine Art, an Atlanta-based and world-renowned gallery with a 33-year history of supporting artists and collectors. This week, when the podcast comes out, Thomas will be back in Serenbe for a handful of exciting events. Friday the 29th in September, join us for Art Over Dinner, an intimate evening to celebrate Thomas and his works over cocktails and dinner. Then, on the 30th, Saturday, there's another chance to meet Thomas as a free public reception where his works will be on view. And if you can't make it to those events, you can also see his gorgeous Serenbe Series in Hope Austin's space at the Serenbe Designer Showhouse, which is open Thursday through Sunday until October 22nd. Now, if you're listening to this after all these events are over, then in our show notes, we'll tell you how to learn more about Thomas and purchase his works at Jackson Fine Art. In this interview, Steve and I chat with Thomas about transitioning careers from journalism to fine art and how he got started creating and photographing installations in nature. Also, we'll discuss the time he spent as an artist in residence here at Serenbe last spring.
So much of what we do as humans is we try to get nature to conform to us or to conform to our needs. I see a lot of these pieces I do as an opportunity to do the opposite, to make our materials conform to nature. And that involves them sort of mimicking the contours of the landscape or coming into confluence with the colors in the sky or in the landscape, and then also moving with the wind and responding to the natural light as it changes.
Thomas, we are so excited to have you on Serenbe Stories. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Look forward to the conversation and excited to see these images that are starting to come our way.
I know. We're recording this early August, but when this is out, the world will see all of these gorgeous artworks that Thomas created while he was at Serenbe. But I want to kick it off, Thomas, with a little bit about your background and share with our listeners how you came into photography, because you really started your career as a journalist, an editor, a book reviewer. So give us a little bit about your background and how you ended up being really an installation artist and photographer.
Yeah, well, I actually loved making art when I was a kid. I took photography classes in high school and in college, and I did a lot of sculpture in elementary school and high school, and actually even won an award when I was in like 10th grade or something like that. But it never occurred to me to pursue that path for whatever reason. And in college, I was a history major and just loved history and loved writing and just sort of decided that I wanted to pursue something along those lines. So I spent a year in France after college, and then I went to New York City to try to work in publishing or journalism, and did that for a long time. First, working in book publishing at Simon & Schuster. I wanted to be like in the editorial department, but I ended up in the publicity department, which was not what I expected. But that was an interesting experience. And I did that for a few years. And then I hooked up with an old friend who worked at this lifestyle supplement of Forbes magazine called Forbes FYI. So I got a job there. And it was a wonderful gig. I mean, I spent 10 years there, and I wrote about all different kinds of stuff, did travel stories, book reviews. I had like an electronics column that I did, and edited a whole section of reviews and things, and traveled the world. I mean, this is the old days when there were all these press junkets that people went on, and I went to Peru and rode the Orient Express and all this crazy stuff. It was amazing. But about 2/3 of the way through that 10 years, I started to get a little bit antsy. And I felt like I wasn't really hitting the nail or hitting the mark the way I wanted to as a writer. I wanted to be writing like investigative sort of personal journalism stories for the New Yorker, a la Joseph Mitchell or Joe E. and stuff like that. And I would come up with these amazing ideas for articles like this. I'd do a lot of research, but then when the point came where I actually had to write them, I would just hit a wall.
Interesting.
Like I couldn't do it. And I sort of banged against that wall for a while. And then at some point, I just thought about picking up a camera. Picked up a camera and started taking pictures because the creative outlet that I thought I was going for wasn't really taking me where I wanted to go. So I just found another one. And I just started taking pictures like crazy. Living in New York City, taking pictures of people on the street or taking pictures of more like abstract stuff of like waves crashing on the East River and stuff like that. And it just sort of grew and grew and grew until my life was sort of like 90% my job, 10% doing photography, and then that percentage tilted more and more and more in the photography direction. But the interesting thing, though, is that in terms of my sort of literary interests, the things I was interested in writing about, in a way, are similar to my artwork in the sense that I loved stories about finding extraordinary things in ordinariness. I mentioned Joseph Mitchell. I mean, he was a guy who would just meet these strange characters on the streets of New York and just write incredible yarns about them and weave them into all these other narratives. And it was so wonderful. And so I think even though I didn't end up pursuing that journalistic literary career that I wanted to, I think I carried something from that into this new career that I took on.
And when you were starting to take the photos over time, as you flipped from 90-10 to 10-90, did you start trying to get paid for the photography or to have it shown as artwork? Or how did that transition happen?
Yeah, well, the first thing I did is I had a friend who was a DOP at Getty Images, like the big stock firm.
Mm-hmm.
And without me having any real training as a photographer, she just like gave me a contract to like shoot.
Wow.
Yes. And so I just started trying to think of funny, interesting images that I could take that could potentially be used in advertisements. And so it's all very speculative. And so you come up with an idea for something and then you just execute it and they put it up on their website and people buy it. And
right.
This was the days before like micro stock where everybody's a stock photographer and they make pennies per image. There was like a very small number of people doing it back then, and you could actually make a little bit of money. It was wonderful. What a high it was to be suddenly making a little bit of money doing photography. So that was how I started and how I sort of funded my habit.
Do you think that your interest in photography, because I was an art history major and I loved the research and I loved culling all the information. And a lot of times once it came to writing the paper, I felt like, well, I'd already learned it. I didn't really want to regurgitate it. Do you think the instantaneousness of photography was something that intrigued you?
Maybe. The way I felt about it was more like, whereas I talked about a wall with being a journalist, with photography, it just felt like an open road.
Yeah.
And with writing, I loved thinking about it, fantasizing and strategizing about it, but not executing. Whereas executing with what I'm doing now is just like, I just see it and I can go for it. And the pleasure is not in talking about it. The pleasure is in doing it.
So tell me then, how did you get into the installations? Because after the Getty world, did you at that time, I feel like you moved to California at one point. Was there a bit of a change? Mm-hmm.
When we still lived in New York, my wife and I bought a little house in the Catskills, like go hang out on vacations and weekends and stuff. And it was on about 8 or 9 acres of wooded land. And I just sort of made it into my laboratory. And I started doing these setup images in there because I'd gotten into a lot of photographers who did sort of staged photography, like Gregory Crutzen and Jeff Wall and people like that. And I tried to do the more sort of street photography or portrait photography. I don't think I'm like a people person enough to like take pictures of people. I've never been really good at. Maybe I just don't. My empathy doesn't work that way in that direction.
Interesting.
And so I wanted to do images that I set up myself, as opposed to capturing spontaneity of outside forces. Although that sort of came in later. So I started making these Andy Goldsworthy like constructions in the woods out of sticks and leaves, and then I started incorporating like fireworks into them because I'd go to Pennsylvania and buy a bunch of firecrackers and just kind of going nuts up there. And then by that point, I was shooting with a large format camera with 4x5.
Okay.
I would get these big lush images of these things I made with smoke and laser beams and stuff. And it was just very, very experimental, sort of coming out of nowhere. But it's sort of how I developed my style of making these installations in nature.
And some of the ones that are on your website that are in the woods, were any of those constructed there, those early ones?
Yeah, there's one called Leaves Number 1. That's this huge thing I made out of fall foliage that was shot there. And Cheese Balls was also shot there.
Oh, I love that one. Yeah.
That place. And a few others. Any of my images that are labeled Napanock, New York are shot in that place.
Okay, perfect. We'll put them in the show notes for everybody.
Yeah.
You moved out to California, and did that shift your thoughts? Different light, different venue, ocean?
Yeah, well, it crushed me for a while.
Oh, no.
Because I developed this whole style of making these sort of floating installations that were attached to trees. We got to Northern California, and unless you're in the redwood forest, there's no trees. It's just like rolling coastal prairie and beaches. And I sort of struggled with that for a while. And then I realized that I needed to basically make my own trees. And so I started building these off-camera structures that would support my installations. The other big thing that I started to encounter in California was wind, which is something I hadn't had to contend with so much in the East Coast, particularly when you're in the trees. And that sort of crushed me for a while because I really was fixated on taking sharp images. And I think that's partly a photography thing. It's like you look at photography, the kind of photography I was looking at from like the early 2000s. It was those Gregory Crutzen and, I'm blanking on all the names right now, but these mainly white guys who would do these massive images that were super tack sharp. And then you'd fall into them and be blown away. And I was sort of like feeling like I wanted that, but I could never get it because the wind was always blowing. And I always shoot with long exposures and all the things would be waving around and it would just become a big blur. And I struggled with that for a while until I had the realization that I needed to embrace it and that I needed to essentially adapt to the wind and make it part of the work. And that was really one of the biggest revelations for me in the past few years, is embracing the elements and making the elements my collaborator and not my adversary, as I had in the past.
And I love that when you were here, we didn't have wind, and so we had to create wind. Can we talk about that at all? Or is that okay? So we were in the woods, and for one of your pieces that turned into two of the artworks that are available. And you called me up one day, I think you texted me and said, do you have any blowers, any leaf blowers?
Yeah.
I was like, what do you want?
Yeah, well, you luckily you had two very high quality battery operated leaf blowers. And we used them to make the installations move, which was great.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Some of the favorite pictures is stepping back and watching all the activity with the leaf blowers and the people.
Oh, right. Yeah. And that's another way that collaboration has become more and more a part of my work. It started with me thinking of collaborating with nature, but it just keeps spreading or expanding in different ways, like Serenbe, but also my recent live installation in California was collaboration with other people was a big part of it.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a little bit, just because I loved reading about it. This was in Tiburon, which for our listeners is in the Bay Area. And the piece is set, or it's really more of an installation than a single, what we would call piece, on kind of a coastal outcropping, if that'd be the right way to say it. But I'm fascinated by that story because I think of you as maybe an installation photographer, but I feel like you've grown into an environmental artist and photographer. And so do you think that Tiburon piece was sort of not a capstone, but like a pinpoint of like, oh, I could do this as well?
Yeah, I mean, I've done a few things on smaller scale. I mean, I would include what we did in the woods and Serenbe in that
Yeah.
list, but this was certainly the biggest scale thing that I've done like that before, and it actually lasted for almost 8 weeks,
Oh, great.
which was crazy, and it still feels crazy to me considering how sort of ephemeral. I mean, all of my work is very ephemeral. I mean, I'm not doing Richard Serra
Right.
acid burners, or whatever those things, iron those things are made of. Part of the appeal of them is their fragility. And so to make something that was going to last that long was really challenging and a little bit nerve making. But we did it, and it was up. It survived quite nicely. And back to the collaboration, there was like people who would come and check on it. And if one of these little puff windsock things came out of the ground, they would just poke it back. And I gave a team of volunteers like a little kit, a little first aid kit for my installation. They would go a couple times a week and just like fix things if they'd gone awry or whatever. I was able to observe that. I wasn't able to be there most of the time because I'm on the East Coast and it's in California, but I was able to look at it multiple times every day because of all the people talking about it on Instagram.
That's so cool.
Every picture I saw, there were like multiple people around it, inside of it. It really brought the bees, that thing, particularly small children. They really.
I bet. Well, and you had people, I believe, helping construct it with you, right? Was there a little bit of volunteer work that happened?
I needed help. It was because the installation was comprised of these puffs, these windsock puffs that I made that were basically tool attached to a rim, a sort of a wire hoop, and then attached to a fiberglass rod with this rigging system that I came up with so that it would swivel 360 degrees, depending on which direction the wind was coming from.
So cool.
I made like 300 of them in my studio back east, but I needed hundreds more. And so I did an Instagram post and I was like, who wants to come help me make these puffs? I'm going to be at the Tiburon Lodge from Monday through Friday. And here's a sign up genius. I did a sign up genius with 10 volunteers per day for 5 days. And it completely filled up in like 2 hours.
Love that.
And then I needed more people and I added more slots and they filled up immediately. I was totally blown away. I couldn't believe that people would want to come and make puffs with me.
Of course they
really
would.
did. And people came from all over the Bay Area. One woman even drove all the way from LA to make these things with us. And she announced to the room that she'd had tickets to Emmylou Harris at the Greek that night, but she decided to come here and do this instead. And we were all like, what? It was
a super
crazy.
fan.
See, everyone wants to ride the coattails of a great artist.
Oh, yeah, right. Well, it was certainly an unusual experience that I was offering up by doing this. And I think people really responded to that, which was really cool.
Well, when you were in residency last spring here with the art farm, tell us a little bit about your experience, because you didn't know much about us. Your gallery, Jackson Fine Art, we had a relationship with them and they kind of called you up and said, these people want to do something. What was going through your mind? And I can't remember if you had been to Georgia or not before.
I had a show with them a few years ago, and I'd spent a little bit of time in Georgia before that. But I mean, I was excited, initially because it was a new landscape for me to explore, because I've been doing so much work in California for the past number of years. And then since I'd been back on the East Coast, I'd done a fair amount of work in coastal places, testing out East Coast beaches as opposed to West Coast ones. So the prospect of doing something in a more inland, hilly, lush, green setting was really exciting to me.
Yeah, and it was such a perfect time. The photos are so green and lush, and these yellow flowers that you picked up in one of the pieces. Tell us about how you chose the materials that you used and where you got them from.
Yeah, well, the first thing I did when I got there was I walked 10 miles or more in one day, just like finding all sorts of interesting places. But I really did hone on that one spot where there was this incredible super bloom of these yellow flowers, the name of which I can't recall at the moment, but it was really beautiful. I brought a whole bunch of different materials to work with, but I chose the ones that I felt really worked well with that spot. So when one of the pieces in that beautiful flower area was made of tulle, and the other one was made of those yellow cups, which I actually sourced locally at the party city in that town that's nearby. And they were just, both materials just like were a wonderful contrast to that setting. And like the essence of my work is really juxtaposition. And I like to take these materials that really seem sort of dissonant and like they don't really belong there, and then try to bring them into equilibrium with the environment in a way. So because I feel like so much of what we do as humans is we try to get nature to conform to us or to conform to our needs. I see a lot of these pieces I do as an opportunity to do the opposite, to make our materials conform to nature. And that involves them sort of mimicking the contours of the landscape or coming into confluence with the colors in the sky or in the landscape, and then also moving with the wind and responding to the natural light as it changes.
Well, the fourth piece is set in our wildflower meadow. And
Right.
I think of it, I won't say what I think, I'll let you talk about it first, but I absolutely love that one. And that was the one that we didn't see. And I kind of loved that it was sort of like a secret piece. Was that also tooled?
Yes. The thing that I really sort of, this breakthrough that I had at Serenbe was this thing that kept happening in the shooting, either in the woods or near the woods, is that at the end of the day, when the sun is low, it flickers through the treetops and it creates sort of the spotlight effect. And I think it was particularly nice light when I was there because it was sort of intermittent rain. And then there was a lot of moisture holding in the air, which the light fuse through and make this beautiful softness. But like that piece in the meadow, there was just like magical spotlight coming through the trees that just lit the exact center of that installation and then nothing else. I mean, I think it sort of strafes along the front of it or something. I'm not looking at it right now. But
No, but it felt like, I don't know, like fire in the meadow, or I don't know, it had this incredible energy to it, but a softness.
Yeah. No, I look at it now and I'm like, God, how could I replicate that with artificial lighting? And I don't think I could. I mean,
it was so lush and beautiful. And I love that all three of them are there's four pieces, but two of them are versions of each other. But the three settings are so different. I do love the yellow cups are solo cups. So when people see the photos, they'll have to see that one is not the same as the other, but we love it. And, it's really exciting because you and Jackson Fine Art have been really generous, and 10% of proceeds are going back to the art farm. So all the pieces that sell, we're really excited about. And we're going to do, we should let everybody know. And when this comes out, it'll be pretty much happening, is you're coming back in September, and we're going to do a gallery show. We're going to have a dinner for you. And then you're also going to be featured in our Atlanta Homes and Lifestyles Designer Showhouse. And so I know your wife is coming, which is really exciting. And I just talked to the designer this week of the show house, or the one for that room, and she's so excited for your pieces. And I don't know if you've talked to the gallery. I don't know.
I did. I talked to Coco about it yesterday. Yep.
So we're thrilled to have them in the house. And then I also heard that a wonderful artist that Jackson also represents, Andrew Moore, she chose one of his pieces is going to be in there. And he had been in residence a few years back.
Right.
And so that'll, yeah.
He was
so
actually one of my early inspirations.
He's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very different style, but very akin in a way. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And that's Hope Austin, who is the designer. But we're super excited to have the show. And I know Jackson Fine Art, and I should say no relation to you.
I know.
Everybody keeps asking me, is going to choose some other photographs of yours that were not shot at Serenbe that will also be in the show. And then you're going to come help hang it, which we're thrilled about. So we invite everybody to come to that. And then, we'll put all the links there. Tell us what is next for you. I mean, you're going to come back and see us. I know you've been pretty busy this summer. You've been shooting out here on the East Coast. What's going on? Like, what's happening? Did the Tiburon press create any new interest? Hopefully this show and everything, we'll get some stories out about it. But what's going on and what's next? Where's your head?
Yeah, so I'm talking to some people about some outdoor stuff. But the big thing I'm working on right now is an indoor installation at the Brooks Museum in Memphis. And they have this wonderful rotunda in the center of the building where I'm going to make a hanging fabric piece that's going to be animated by fans. So I'm basically going to create an indoor weather system with fans. And I've been devising this mad scheme where I'm going to have the fans blowing on a sequence controlled by this little microcontroller thing so that they can be sort of doing different things, and changing all the time. And my vision for it is something between like a kelp forest swaying in the tank, or maybe like an octopus sort of like moving and changing shape and changing color. So that's a really fun new direction for me to be moving in. There's actually there's a post on my Instagram from last summer that was sort of a prototype of what this was.
Define that.
And so to do something indoors that's a little bit more easy to control that'll be an interesting path for me.
Yeah, that sounds super cool.
So that's taking up my psychic space right now.
When does that get installed and what's the time frame?
We're installing it the week before Thanksgiving, but I think there's going to be an official opening / Q&A event, I think probably after that. I'll be posting.
Keep us posted. It's not too far away from us. We can maybe come attend. Yeah. So I love that you said that, you kind of had a breakthrough, which is sort of the light in the woods and everything. Was there anything else about the stay that you had that was sort of memorable or interesting to stay in the cottages? And I know you were here for a long time away from your family for about 2 weeks. And we showered you with people. There were a lot of events going on and probably ran you down a little bit, but we had fun bringing people out and sharing you with everybody. But were there any favorite things from your time here?
I was captivated by the way a person can live there. I really like my neighborhood where I live right now, but it's hemmed in by multiple big roads where cars drive 50 miles an hour. And it drives me nuts. And there are these great little towns that are basically these highways. There's cars go like this. And to live in a community like that where you can just sort of breeze out of your house and onto the street and onto your bike and be in the woods or, in the next hamlet, it seemed pretty idyllic to me. I've actually thought about it a lot since we were there.
I'm glad you're bringing your wife back. Does she travel with you very often?
Yeah. Well, she was there too. She came with me when I came to visit.
The very first time. Yeah.
Yeah. We looked at some houses for fun too, actually.
Okay.
But the other thing I'd say about Serenbe is it's wonderful how much nature you have there. And I had such a great time going on walks and exploring these places. And it seems like it's expanding in terms of where a person can explore. So that's wonderful.
Golly. And how exciting if we could entice you to stuff like this.
We'll see.
I think your wife's job.
Just think of all the setups and pictures.
My wife is a real estate addict, so there's that.
Oh well, we're all set then.
Just a little something, Thomas. A little something.
Yeah.
So one of the questions almost leading to that we ask everybody on Serenbe Stories is, now that you've been and you've sort of experienced it, if someone was visiting for the first time, what would you tell them to do when they're here?
Go for a walk. That's the gift. One of the many gifts, but the one that I fixated on the most is how it's there for you as a human being on your feet or on a bicycle. That alone, to me, is such a wonderful thing in this car-dominated world that we're all living in. But also just the community just feels very open and accessible there. And I'm sure that a person going on that walk will have many positive interactions with strangers. So do that too.
True. Well, we can't wait to have you back. And we invite everybody who is listening to come to the show house and see your work, or buy a ticket to dinner if there's any left, or come see the gallery opening. Any final thoughts, Thomas?
No, I'm super excited to come. and gather more impressions and have more experiences down there.
Well, we can't wait to have you back, and we really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much.
Look forward to seeing you in maybe the colors of fall will have
I
started.
know. I can't wait to see that.
Ooh.
Good. See you then.
Well, thank you so much.